Okay, well, it is a great honor to introduce Sandra Janoff to you all today. I'm going to read a fairly complete biography. She co-developed with Marvin Weisberg the principle-based methodology called Future Search, which is a process that gets the whole system focusing on the future and creating values-based action strategies. Future Search makes possible a shared picture based on the experience of all those present, where the entire group dialogue. Sandra has worked in more than 45 countries on complex social, technical, and economic issues. She has a deep commitment to creating conditions that enable people to move from fragmentation to wholeness. Sounds a lot like dialogue, doesn't it? We'll talk about that. She's worked with UNICEF. She's worked with so many people. She's worked with preventing child abuse in schools across Uganda. She's created policy for 0 to 5 year childcare with the U.S. Bipartisan Policy Center, delivering on co-production policy with the Department of Health in Northern Ireland, creating a more welcoming Europe for people on the move with the Church of Sweden. She has worked with Harold Clark in 4 state departments of corrections to create strategic futures in Nebraska, Washington, Massachusetts, and Virginia. She's also worked with the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Most recent initiative is with the Virginia Department of Corrections in partnership with the Commonwealth of Virginia, addressing the issue of gangs. Sandra is a director of the Future Search Network and co-author of Future Search, an action guide to finding common ground. She has also written Stand There. I'm sorry. Don't just do something. Stand there. 10 principles for leading meetings that matter, and lead more and control less. That was her most recent book. Sandra was honored with the OD Network's 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award. She has a PhD in psychology. Her work with individuals, groups, and large complex systems has always been aligned with David Bohm's work with dialogue. So here we are. Welcome, Sandra. So I'm so aware after reading the chapter for the second time that you sent to us that your work is very, very complementary and compatible with what we do here in the Academy with what we call Bohm-inspired dialogue. Maybe the place to get started is just for you to tell us your journey to Future Search, a little bit about Future Search, and how you came to it. Just to get things rolling.
Thank you. I always take a breath after the interview. It's after the reading my biography. It's been a lot of years, so all of those incredible experiences that I've had were not squeezed into a couple. I've been doing this since the early 90s. And let me just say privileged without having known or assumed that I would have these opportunities to work with systems. But the thing that I always knew was what was significant in the way I could work, not just the way I wanted to work, but the way I could work. Let me just ask you, for starters, how many of you have heard of Future Search or are familiar with it or have been part of one? Okay, a couple of hands. So maybe many of you don't, when you hear the words Future Search, it doesn't land in any place. Is that true for many of you? Yeah.
Several people have raised their hands electronically, so
I also want to say I appreciate that you're keeping the videos on so I can look at you and see your reactions. I did something recently where everybody went off camera and I was talking to smiling faces, and I, for a moment, thought that they were really smiling at me. They were 25 portraits. So thank you, because I want you to be able to see me and I could see you. I started my professional life in an alternative high school. We were young. It was the hippie years. How many go back that far? Anyone good? Like this. Oh, thank you. God bless the young ones. And it was a hell of a time. But anyway, it was good. We were a young staff. There were 17 of us, 200 students, and we were working with young people who could not manage in a more traditional system. And we had the autonomy to create the system that we believed as the adults, as I said, even though we were young, could meet the needs of the students. And one of my connections, and didn't, of course, know it at the time, is that I taught math and physics. That was my major in undergraduate school. So one link to David Bohm and wanting to hear as much of him on the YouTube interviews as I possibly can, but such an appreciation of an understanding of the cosmos. And what did that mean? What did it mean for trying to create a learning community? Well, one of the things that we did, because we did it intuitively, and I came to learn the terminology for how I am oriented in the work that I do. But one of the things that we did in the 10 years that this experiment existed was to create structures that were flexible enough to meet the changing needs of young people over that decade. And when I left, because that experiment, the funding was pulled, I went to graduate school and realized or learned that there were significant thinkers that had proposed theories that had names for the things that were intuitive to us and the things that resonated in me. And in my graduate work, when I was told I had to make a decision between social psychology and clinical psychology, my answer was both, because I couldn't and wouldn't fragment the two ways of thinking. So in my work, and this actually was in my clinical psychology work, I learned the difference between structural change and behavior change. I see some heads nodding. Yes, thank you. It's so often that I experience that when I say this, that I am a structuralist, that the work I do is based on creating conditions for people to do what they are capable of doing. I know I come up against that whole kind of, I'll call it a fantasy, but the whole belief, the whole wish to change individuals, to have some kind of tool or mechanism or technique or something that really will change a person's personality or motivation or aspiration. And from the early days, and I want to mention who I spent my professional life working with, we really let go of that belief that we can change people, control people's behavior and personality, meaning get those who talk more to talk less, get those who don't talk enough to talk, et cetera, et cetera. And we paid attention to structure. And of course, as I think you all know, because I see the nodding heads, the influence of structure, changes in structure, influence changes in behavior. So that really sits at the bottom of at the foundation of my work. I'll say two other things. When I took a particular class in a clinical class in clinical psychology, the professor walked in the first day and he said, since you are all, and he's talking to us graduate students, in the business of change, I assume you have a theory of change. And I tell that story all of the time because I remember sitting and gulping. It's like, I hope I'm not called on. But in the next moment, I realized that he was going to teach us his theory of change, which was fine. But the whole idea of having a theory of change, it almost seems so obvious. Why are we speaking it? But what is our belief system? What are our assumptions about what enables a system, regardless of what level of the system we're talking about, to go from here to here, to aspire to achieve what it is that they're aspiring? And differentiation integration theory has been my theory of change. And along with my business partner. Now, let me pause for a half a second and say, does anyone not know the name? Well, it's funny to ask it in a negative. Do you know the name Marvin Weisbord? Some of you? Yeah, some of you. Good. Marvin Weisbord was, of course, still is my dear friend, but was my business partner for 25 years.
Oh.
Pardon me?
I was just exclaiming.
Yes. What were you exclaiming?
Pleasure it would be to work with him for that long.
Oh my God. In a word, lucky. Lucky. And as a matter of fact, sitting right here is Productive Workplaces, if you can see it. If anyone is working with organizations on that larger scale, beyond working with individuals or small groups, Productive Workplaces is the most incredible text you could read. So I recommend that. But he was actually just finishing. I mean, I think the draft was in and it was being published when we got together. And one of his thesis, his theory, his belief system about how to manage the complexity and the turbulence of the time then was under the paradigm of everybody improving whole systems. So the everybody is the diversity of the system, and whole systems thinking is different, understanding the connections amongst all of those parts of the system. And we started working. The seeds of Future Search were in from the thinking, the conceptualization of some brilliant social scientists before us. The names Eric Trist, Fred Emery, Ron Lippitt, Evershin Raymond, who ran large community conferences on the one hand and whole systems conferences on the other. And those two streams came together in the work that Marv and I were doing, again, to bring to life the belief that everybody improving whole systems was an orientation or a paradigm of organization or community work that we wanted to live in. Why? Because the world is changing so fast. Why? Because no one person understands or can impact a system. Why? Because you can have brilliant ideas, but they won't be implemented. And maybe more, why? Because how do you build a picture of reality? Or let me say, how do you build a picture of the complexity of a system that's based on reality? And the answer is to bring all of the perspectives on that system, all of the differences that make a difference together to understand, to learn about what's really real as opposed to what we assume about that system, so that we can together, so that they can take steps that will bring about changes in structure, in policy, in relationships, in capacity.
So let me stop you at that place. So this doesn't, you said you were going to present, and it really is an interview, Sandra. So let Linda and I in to give you some questions and to give you a chance to rest your voice.
I'm glad. It was just
right. Yes, I know. It's when you're on a subject that you absolutely love, it's hard to stop explaining. I know it is.
Oh, yes.
But I think you checked ahead of time, which was very helpful to say how many people know what Future Search is. So I'd love for you just to say, maybe in 4 or 5 sentences, sort of the elements of Future Search. And I'm just to say also, it's been a piece of my practice. And as we mentioned earlier, it's been a piece of Harold Clark's at Vadoc's practice. So, but I think people would like to know just so what happens in a future search. Could you just run over sort of maybe sequentially what happens in a future search?
Yeah. And I'm going to screen share.
Very good.
And where this little slide set starts is in this statement that I will read quickly, but I think you'll resonate with it. And let me also say that the work I'm talking about are task-focused meetings. So given, and this, I want to pass this statement on. Ralph Carrier was a UNICEF director. Considering how much time we spend in meetings, it should shock us that we don't get important work done. Meetings are where we confront and resolve the problems and issues society faces. If we can't transform our meetings, how can we expect transformation in society? So the principles, they come on one at a time. So let me just get them on. Getting the whole system in the room. The idea about that is if you really want people to understand and take responsibility for the system, they have to experience it for themselves. It's not about presentation and papers. And we also believe in order for a system to change, that people have to interact with those in the environment of the system and who are key to their success. And I really believe the biggest frustration in meetings is the reason why people are cynical. So when we get the diversity of the system together, people with authority, resources, information, expertise, and those that are impacted by the outcomes, we have an opportunity. People learn at a deeper level with the opportunity to act at a deeper level. So that's at the heart. But then the second piece of that is at the heart that I know you will resonate with is what does it mean to learn together before you act? And we use that metaphor of the blind man and the elephant, and I'm sure you all know that. If anyone doesn't, the 6 blind men who want to find the elephant, they each touch a part and they each have an explanation. The leg feels like a tree, the ear feels like a fan, the tusk feels like a spear, and they start arguing. And they argue loud and strong. And what you know, as those of you so deeply in dialogue, is that each of us is so connected and attached to our realities. As a matter of fact, David Bohm, who in one of the interviews was asked, what does the word belief come from? Believe or belief? And he said, the root of it is lieb or love, that we really love. I have this on my computer. We really love the ideas that we hold. They are beloved to us. So what does it mean for a system to learn about the complexity that includes all of our realities? And that is what we do. We spend the time to learn, to undo assumptions so that we really are acting on a reality-based experience together. And then focusing on the future is instead of past problems, discovering the common ground, what do we share, and taking responsibility for action. And when you hold these principles, the meeting itself is a journey from exploring the past understanding deeply the present, creating futures you believe in, preferred futures, then all of that learning converging to common ground, discovering if there is a common ground agenda and translating that to action. And I want to say one more thing about the structural issue. If you can see the who's in the room, that's a structural intervention. How they learn before they act, that's a structural intervention. And you'll ask me about Harold, and I want to tell you who Harold Clark brought into the room for creating a strategic future for the departments of corrections that he was the director of in his career. But when I remember, I said differentiation integration theory is really what we hold. When people explore their past, they're sitting in what we call mixed groups. When they explore their present, they're sitting in what we call stakeholder groups that a planning group has come to the understanding differentiates the system in the most meaningful way. So when they explore their present, they are hearing the differences that make a difference and exploring and differentiating in order to understand the system more clearly. And then when they go into creating preferred futures, we have them back in mixed groups where which is a hologram of the whole, with the opportunity to integrate, create integrated futures, because this system now understands the different parts. And the last thing I'll say about DI theory is that you can't integrate unless you first differentiated. And you know.
So I still want you to say something about, give us a picture. You talked about the principles, but talk about what physically happens in the meeting, so that people have some sense of, it lasts over 3 days. What happens each day. I don't mean in great detail, but just so we have some general idea of what a future search is.
Well, people come into the meeting, and they begin it, as I said, mixed groups. So they're sitting with stakeholders, with the different stakeholders around the mixed group. And we explore the past. And the way we explore the past is by everybody on their feet contributing critical events and milestones over the past, let's say 30 years generically, that we put on these massively long timelines. And people are we're creating an information pool that's based on everyone's experience. And we are building a picture of where we have been on the level of where people have been in their personal lives, in the level of the system. So when we work with corrections over the past 30 years, and in the world on the level of the globe. And it's, the format is such that everyone is contributing. Future Search is about people learning from their experience. So everyone is contributing their experience, making meaning in small groups of their experience, reporting that out to the whole, and as a whole, having, you ready, dialogue. So if you can think about it, throughout 3 days, and Future Search is a 2-night sleep because so much is happening. Dialogue is an integral part of how Future Search works, because people are continuously, whether it's in small groups or in the large group, in dialogue with one another. The unit of change is the whole group. So it isn't just individuals speaking, or it's not individual development, and it's not just small group work. People will report out to the whole group, and that dialogue that happens, that crosses all of the boundaries when you have a group of 60, 70, 80, 90 people together, enables the learning to go more deeply in the whole. I also want to say this about dialogue. When people, so that's the learning about the past. And the end of that day is people have both worked in small groups and had dialogue in the large group. We start working, we transition into the present and build a mind map. Everyone contributes to a big, map on, what mind maps are on the wall, of trends in the world having an impact on the system. And when they come back the next day and work in their stakeholder groups, the dialogue that happens when people are working in stakeholder groups, meaning they are gathered together around their similarities, the dialogue that takes place is people discover the differences in their similarities. And then when they report and talk as a whole group, the dialogue the dialogue enables people to discover the similarities across the differences. Do you hear how? Should I say it again, or was it clear enough?
Right, it was clear.
Clear enough. And so they learn about their present based on what is happening, what trends are impacting each stakeholder group, what they are doing now in response, and what they want to do that they're not doing. And also, this is a whole morning's worth of work. We do what's called prouds and sorries, which is every stakeholder group responding to the task that says, what is it that you are doing that you are proud of? And what are you sorry about? Meaning, take responsibility for it. It's not about blaming or finger pointing. All of this in relation to the task. And again, the report outs and the dialogue in the whole group. When they've completed that, it's time, and they're ready, it's time to move on to creating preferred futures, which they do in the mixed groups. As I said, again, the opportunity to create integrated scenarios. People have a lot of time. They go off into the future. It is now 2030, let's say, and your dream has become a reality. Describe it with a sufficient amount of time to create these real scenarios of structure and policy and program and relationship. Come back, report, and we learn together about people's aspirations. And then we are coming toward the end of the second day, which is time to pull all of this together and discover if there is a common ground agenda. That begins the afternoon of the second day, taken over to the morning of the third day. And a common ground agenda is about not do we negotiate or vote. It's what are the shared aspirations in this diverse community of people here. And if it's common grounds, we come to learn that. And if it's not, we come to learn that as well. And through a process, which I won't describe, we get the elements of the shared agenda, the common ground agenda that is confirmed by everyone. That's part of the process, confirmed by everyone. And when you know that, when a group of diverse people in a system understand or come to create the umbrella of shared values under which they all stand, then they translate that to action. And that's the piece that happens on the third day. What does action, integrated action, look like as a way to take all of this out of the meeting? Is this, thank you for letting me say it. Is this working for you?
That is perfect. Thank you, Sandra. And I'm going to give Linda a chance. She hasn't even had a chance to say a question. So I'm going to ask her to talk now. But that's exactly what I was asking for. And it was really well done. Much appreciated.
Future search in 10 minutes or less. That was great. Thank you for just outlining the elements. So I guess what I'm curious about is you talk about dialogue within the context of these small groups. I don't think you provide, necessarily training about that, but they seem to happen. I mean, dialogue just happens, right? Because you kind of created the context and you've created the goal of creating common ground, right? So that seems to be enough to keep people in dialogue, right?
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah.
Do you find conflict coming up? And if you do, how have you handled that?
Yeah. Are you going to ask me about Harold Clark's conferences? Because I want to mention who Harold has brought into the room. So you'll hear the potential for learning together from realities that go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And then I'll talk about what happens when conflict comes up. Should I do that now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I'm saying this for a reason. I think, are a couple of you from the Virginia Department of Corrections?
I think we have a few here. Yeah.
Right. So Harold, I think everyone here knows there's nothing like a visionary leader. And there's nothing like the phone call that you get from a visionary leader. And there's nothing like working with a visionary leader who is willing to take risks and push boundaries. We all agree on that? Harold Clark, since you know him, is one of the pool, not such a big pool, of leaders that I've been so privileged to work with. And they get it. It's not that they're not scared, and it's not that they're not taking a risk. They are. But the faith that I have as I stand by these visionary leaders is in the belief that if you bring the whole of the system, the diversity of the system together to struggle on an issue that's important, that they are interdependent on, you with me? They all need each other to get the job done. That they will struggle and get through it. As a matter of fact, didn't David Bohm say that anyone who wants to do anything difficult has to go through difficulties? I think I'm quoting him. But anyway, that's our belief. So let me just listen to the stakeholders that came into a Department of Corrections future search. All of those within the system, so we had every level of the system there, community elect, and this, by the way, is to create a strategic direction. Community elected officials, providers, other state agencies, current offenders, and former offenders in the room together. So what does it mean to get that kind of diversity on all kinds of levels into the room in discussion? Troy, are you with me? Yeah. And not because you've been there, because that's what Harold does. So what enables this group of people, this diverse group on all levels, to be in dialogue around a small group? One of the things that we say, and everything, we don't have facilitators sitting in the group and we don't do any training beforehand, but the tasks themselves are very clear. And we also, I could tell you what they are for each portion. For the past, for example, all of the data is on the timelines, and the task for one group is to look at a particular timeline, and with all of that data, what is the story that we know about the people in this room? Or what is the story that we learn about the history of corrections in Virginia? Or what's the story of the past 30 years in the world? And what are the implications of that story for the work we're here to do? So that's the task that they work on, number one. And number two, they self-manage. And they they are a group typically of 8. And there's enough social science research that says a group of 8, high probability of self-managing. So, and by the way, thank you, Nancy, for bringing in about the length of the journey. The fact that this group is together for a period of time, and as I said, 2 nights sleep, people are learning how to work together on these specific tasks. Now, you ask about conflict in the big group. I don't know if you've followed either my work, which I have brought Ivana Gazarian and systems-centered thinking into my work in organizations. Is this ringing a bell for anyone? Probably not. Yes, okay, great. She was a mentor of mine. She's no longer alive, but Ivana Gazarian was a group psychotherapist and theoretist. And I worked with her for years because of my psychology career. And one of the things that I learned from her, but also from thinkers past, that when differences arise, and what is conflict about? It's the irritation, frustration, anger, rage around differences. We are wary of differences. We seek similarities, but differences disturb us. So when differences arise with the potential of creating a split or opposition, one of the ways we come into, as facilitators, into that dynamic is by getting that difference joined. Is this familiar to anyone?
Say more about what you mean by joined.
So the experience of, God, it could be on any level. I don't see it that way. I'm really angry that we're continuing to repeat the word. I'm trying to pull something out of the air. Someone says that. The minute someone brings it a difference like that, everyone is on edge. What's the facilitator going to do? What's somebody else going to do? The way what I'm listening for is if that risk is going to be scapegoated or the identified patient, we're going to make that person better or ignored. And the way I believe, and I think all of you do as well, to keep the group whole is to assure that all of those differences are part of our resources for us. So I would ask, if no one joins them, is anyone else angry? Now, believe it or not, you have to try it to experience it. When someone goes, yeah, I'm angry too, it's not important that the content get matched, at the experience. And once we have the anger as a resource, or the frustration, or the boredom, or the joy, or the anything, once we have all of those in the group as a resource, we're whole. Most important, to keep the group whole and on task.
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole lot more, and I'm talking as fast as I can. But it's, what David Bohm talks about. It's the incoherence is so present in us. And how do we move? What does it mean to hold more and more coherence? And the joining enables that. Now, I've written about it, and I teach it in the workshops and all of that, or you can call me. But that's one way to manage conflict. And then if there is such conflict that the whole group is split, if there's really polarity and split, do I have time? There's a way to bring forward in a larger sense what I've just said, which is to get, instead of working across the differences, which I don't know if you've tried, I just don't do it. It's volatile. I mean, people, when you try to cross that boundary, people are even more in their concrete positions.
Right.
What I have done is get the group who have, this is an example. It was a group of actually executives. This was not a future search. And one person said, you know, I'm really glad that we bring our intuition to our decision making. And then someone over here got enraged. What do you mean, our intuition? Our decisions are based on fact. Now, that doesn't sound like it could split the group in half, but the potential was there to split that group into two parts. So here's what I did. I said, okay, let's just see where we are. Would all of those who say, yeah, we make our decisions based on intuition, raise your hand, see who you are. I did the same with the other, on fact. I gave this group who were so committed to intuition an opportunity, not fishbowl. I just had them talk to each other in the large group with their hands raised so that they were making eye contact. Explore this. Let's hear what it means that these decisions are based on the intuition. They're talking about creativity, blah, blah, blah. A minute or two, a few minutes, they all speak together. And then I say, okay, let's see where we are. Can you pause for a second? You get the sense when they're ready. And then I let the other group, decisions based on fact, and they talk together to each other. Now, I am highlighting what I've mentioned before. Similarities, they come together around similarities, that's securing. They discover their differences within the similarities. Same here. Doesn't take a long time. They discover their differences. What happens? They discover the similarities across the differences, and that's when you hear the integrating statement.
Yeah.
No, we don't have, well, in that case is the wake-up call. So of course we use both. Or the wake-up call, you don't have, I think I wrote this example in the paper. The issue of housing. Do we want more housing and do we want equity? Some people don't want more housing, affordable housing, and some people, etc. And then the voice comes up, well, we don't have to solve this. We just have to pay attention that both of these are real for our community. That's the integrating statement. Keep the group whole and on task.
Yes.
Oh, I'm talking so much.
So we've got about another 10 minutes at the most before we go into small groups, Linda. So you want to ask another 10-minute question?
Well, I was going to throw it to you because that was a pretty long question.
You want to know the irony? I told Linda and Nancy I didn't want to lecture.
And we're holding you to it, Sandra. Well, if Linda asks me, I just remember in your paper, there's this wonderful statement that maybe you could elaborate on for a few minutes. And that statement is, one person cannot change a whole system. Systems are just too big, too diverse. The power in them is too widely distributed and things are moving too fast. And I just love that statement that one person cannot change a whole system. And I guess I love it because that's the prevailing belief, is that if we hire a new director, a new whatever, that person will change the system. So I'd just love for you to speak a little bit to that whole issue.
I'm saying this facetiously. You ready, Nancy?
I'm ready.
Those kinds of things put me in a bad mood because it's so obvious. And why, oh, why are we human beings doing what we know doesn't work? One person can't change a whole system. Talk about the literalness of this. Is this obvious or is this an aha?
I think you're making a good point, and yet it is it is a belief that people hold, including the leaders themselves, I think, Sandra.
Yeah, and that's why that puts me in a bad mood. Back to David Bowman and things that he said. You know, I was thinking about when we had so much trouble with the technology in the beginning. He talked about incoherence, and that's more. It's become more and more dangerous because of the scale of our society and technology. And I think we are racing ahead of ourselves. I think our psyches can't keep up with the technological change. And if anyone glanced at the first paragraph of my paper, my chapter, the confluence of global crises is despairing. And of course, I speak that my hope is in the fact that we're moving out of denial. But I despair that more and more people think that we have to hire the right leader for change. When will we learn what David Bohm said and what we've been practicing? That we really need to live in reality. We need to check our assumptions, and we need to bring the multiple perspectives, the multiple realities into the conversation. You know, another thing that David Bohm said is, and listen, it's another obvious, but it's this moment in time. Are human beings capable of dealing with the situation that we ourselves have created? Look at the situation we're in.
Yeah.
You have a list, you know the list. We've got the pandemics, we've got global warming crisis, we've got beyond the health crisis, we've got racial inequalities, social inequalities, economic inequalities, and we're still living in fragmented worlds. So yeah, I'm in despair.
Say a few things, Sandra, if you would, about the complementariness between your future search work and what we're calling Bohm-inspired dialogue. Because I think for me, when I looked at what your experience was with Harold Clark and with respect to VADOC, it seemed like the two just were so complementary that they almost needed each other. And I'd love to hear from you how you see that.
I'm going to step out of despair, because it is true that, first of all, this way of thinking, this way of working is not the lightning rod for the many. It's special. It calls on us human beings to find places in ourselves that are not the default places. It calls on us to make the circle bigger. It calls on us to speak and listen. It calls on us to include people we don't usually include. It calls on us to take the time to learn. That does not happen in a half a day. It calls on us to take the risk that a shared direction is the real direction, not ego-driven direction. And so, again, lucky to be asked by these visionary and courageous leaders to bring their system together in a future search. But I think you experienced the same thing. And Harold, back to his courage, his vision, and his soul. I mean, his soul is to enable people to build capacity. And the more people can build capacity and learn what they do not yet know and step into places where that aren't predetermined, the more we're able to do that on the level of the system and the level of the individual, the healthier a society we have, the healthier individuals, the healthier corrections departments, the healthier states of Virginia, the healthier nation, the healthier world.
That's
And
wonderful. I'm going to stop you there so we can go into small groups. We'll be in those small groups about 15 to 20 minutes and then come back, and people will have all kinds of questions for you, Sandra, when we come back, I know, but also comments. What is it called forth in you? We're interested in hearing that as well. So I'm hoping you're going to be in groups of 4. Let me open the rooms and see if I can make it work.
Okay. Before we get started, I just want to turn everyone's attention to a couple of links that Sandra Janoff kindly put in the chat. She is about ready to start a series of virtual workshops that I think are starting in September. Is that right, Sandra?
yes,
Yeah. And she also put, I believe, a book in there. Don't just do something, stand there. So you have access to 2 links that I think you'll find helpful. Okay, so we had a question even before we asked you to put your chats in the box from Raha. Let's see, Raha, are you here? Yeah, there you are. Could you maybe talk about the question you first put in the chat box about being from India, having religion and caste and race come up? Maybe you can say your question in your own words.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is Raja.
Raja.
So yeah. I will just turn off my video for better sound quality. Yeah. So my question that I initially shared with Linda is this. You know, in India, we have currently a majoritarian religion. It is obviously simmering a lot of discontent among the minorities, understandably so. So that is one major conflict that we have in the country. And the second conflict is we have caste system. So there are so-called upper castes and there are so-called lower castes, and the lower castes have been deprived. So my question very quickly is, what has been your experience? And whenever these kind of groups come in, there is a lot of emotional upheaval. So what has been your experience in working with similar? How does it pan out?
And that it's broken up a bit, but did you have enough sense of it, Sandra?
yeah. If and Raja, if I don't answer it on point, what I'm hearing is all of these differences, all of these societal structures or societal ethos, societal ways of working that have split us, fragmented us, and split us into haves and have-nots, into those with access and those without, into those who have a voice and those who don't. What is that? How do we manage that in a future search? Is that your question, more or less?
Yeah, more or less, yeah, true.
And the way I respond to that is that when I'm really talking about getting the whole system in the room, that principle, it's a design principle, it has to do both with their functional differences, but also demographic differences, so that whatever the system is, it's how, God, I can give you a lot of examples. Let me give the most recent one. I did a future search for creating a more welcoming Europe for people on the move. And this is an initiative sponsored by the Archbishop of the Church of Sweden. And they came to me wanting to gather people that they've been working with on this issue of refugees. And so they wanted a future search. And I said, no, you don't want a future search unless you are ready and willing and will make happen getting that diversity that includes those those who make policy, those who implement, etc., and people on the move. So we had in that room everyone from people who were involved in closing borders to refugees, migrants who are without any kind of citizenship or potential for citizenship because the borders were closed and may at that time have been sent back to their country, to Syria or whichever the country. So I don't shy away from bringing in those demographic or socially constructed differences. For me, they have to be present to one another in order for the work to happen. Now, let me say one more thing. Future searches aren't run on the issue of racism or caste or whatever other, kind of social issue that's so potent. Future searches are run on an issue around which we assure that those with different races and different religions, differing orientations, different status come into the room to work, to struggle together on that issue. So there's no question. And we've run future searches in India. So I would love to be in conversation to be specific. I hope that was somewhat helpful.
So let me ask, I noticed that Chucks has a question. Chucks, would you unmute yourself and turn your camera on and speak your question for Sandra?
Thank you, Sandra. So I'm just curious, I think you mentioned future search as a task focused sort of meeting. And I'm just curious about any evaluations have been done as to its effectiveness and how widespread is it as a methodology around the world?
And Chucks is in Sierra Leone, so that maybe you've worked in.
Yeah. As I said, we've been doing this work since the early 90s. Actually, I just pulled the book that was translated into Korean. This is the 3rd edition of Future Search. In terms of, it's not about measurement, actually. David Bohm was talking about how we fragment science and science from other ways of thinking, or I'm losing a word, and so science is just about measurement. But we have gathered stories, this is the book, Future Search, over the years, and are continuously wanting to understand the ripple effect. That's what we call our research, our outcome on our research on what the outcomes are. So we go back into the systems and say, as a result of that meeting, what were you able to do? And wait, ask me, did you have more to your question? It was, is it researched? There've been, here's another maybe way to answer it. I direct Future Search Network, and I just put futuresearch.net is the website. I just stuck that in the chat. And we have members around the world who are doing the work, and we are continuously paying attention to what is it, what was the task, what did they accomplish? And it's not what did they accomplish a week later. How was the system enabled to build capacity or to transform so that they can do something as a result of this 3-day meeting, which is, by the way, an important 3-day meeting that they couldn't do before. And here's one response. And I've heard this whenever I hear in a system, and by the way, we keep pulling Harold Clark's name in. Whenever you hear a leader or a system that embeds getting the right people in the room for the task, then you know you've made it. I see a head nodding, Sharon. I've heard people ask that question back and say, do we have the right people for that meeting? It's a simple question for a simple meeting, but it's profound. Back to that quote from Rolf Carrier, we have to pay attention to how we structure and shape our meetings, be they half day, full day, 2 day, 1 week, whatever, because it's in those meetings that we work on and resolve the problems of society. So that question of embedding the principles is what this is about. I hope I'm answering your question.
Sandra, I think we have a good question that kind of follows on to that from Katerina. Of course, there's a couple of Katerinas. I think it's not Katerina Pugh, it's the other Katerina. Katerina, you ask about how you define the system. Do you want to ask that question? I think that's a good follow-on question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's me. The background to the question is that I've worked on dialogue labs or social labs in the past, and the idea there was to sort of work on complex issues, the issues of our societies, and I think most problems are inherently complex. And some of those efforts were successful, but some of them failed because of that ambition to get the whole system into the room. And people had a wonderful experience, and tears flowed, and perspectives were changed, but not much resulted as a consequence on the ground, because people weren't effectively connected in one system, sort of on the ground. And I think on another level, I feel it also arises, well, where do you draw the boundaries? And thinking, for instance, of if I were to do this in my organization, it's a system, but it's an organization that works on societal issues. So yeah, it's sort of around that area, the question. Thank you.
Wait, I'm typing something in. Great question. I really look forward to talking more with anyone who wants to talk more, because it's hard to do in a sentence what is really complex planning. That's what a planning group has to work on. One of the first things that if a leader has the kind of itch to scratch and say, I want to get people together to tackle this problem, my first partnering with that leader is to say, let's get together a group, a working size group, maybe 8 or so, of people who understand the system and understand the issues and can begin owning this way of working. So we plan with a planning group. And one of the main questions is, what are the boundaries of the system? How do we differentiate the system? We use the word stakeholders, but how do we differentiate the system so that we really are learning about the parts of the system that enable us to bring the most important perspectives into the room? And how do we assure when we invite the individuals, because the reason it's not hundreds and hundreds is because, and I'm speaking to all of you, the essence of Future Search is in the dialogue that happens. I never use the words Bohemian-inspired dialogue, but it is. The dialogue that happens throughout the meeting is the heart of Future Search. So I don't know how that would happen with hundreds of people, so that's not how I work. But it can happen with 60, 70, or 80 people in a room, or we've just translated it to online. It was a year in the process. But an additional piece around differentiating and who are the stakeholders we want to bring into the room is to assure, and this is the work of the planning group, that collectively in that room, we have people in authority. I just put this in the chat, people with resources, people with expertise, people with information, and people impacted by the outcomes. So what you were talking about, Katerina, is that, yeah, we may have those who wanted to make the policy, but where are those who are impacted by the policy? Or we may have those who were always impacted, but how do they influence policy? I don't work in, David Bohm again, I don't work with with parts of a system, which to me is the fragmenting that we always do. And as a matter of fact, I get pretty irritated when I know people are always working without the whole of the system there or with not enough time and pretend that we're tackling these really important global, whether global or local, but important issues that we have to do something about now. And we're not going to do something about these issues that are so connected each to the other if we only do it in pieces with pieces of the system. You hear me, don't you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But Katerina, your example is absolutely it. So you have the work in front of you, and I love to talk more one-on-one or something. You have the work in front of you that is really a significant issue. Oh, you just moved, and you're saying people get excited and cry for 3 days. I mean, I said this to the World of Neighbors people. You love when people cry, right? They're having feelings, but that's not the work. The work is doing something. So the reason we're still doing future searches and learning together is because people have been able to learn as a system in a reality-based way and take action. And action that they are ready, willing, and able to implement, not recommendations.
So Sandra, we have enough time for one more question, which maybe 3 or 4 minutes on it. And I'm going to ask Renee to ask her question about paradox, if you'll do that, Renee. You're on mute, Renee.
Gotcha. Yeah, we found ourselves kind of lingering over from the end of the first part of the conversation around this paradox that, and some of us in the group do leadership development, that real developed, evolved leaders can facilitate enormous change. And at the same time, we know that a leader alone cannot create change. So maybe it's circling back to where we ended the first session and really speaking to this kind of two things that seem true at the same time.
No, I could say it quickly. A real, did you say evolved, conscious leader can influence change by creating conditions for those in the system to bring their experience and aspiration to bear to change structure, policy, and ways of working. One person can't mandate 100 people to do something. I mean, we know this, Kurt Lewin. So we know this, but the leadership you're talking about is the leader who says, I will enable this way of working.
Right.
That's conscious leadership.
Yeah.
And
thank you. That's really clear.
Yeah. And can I just say, I apologize for skipping over to Hugh, but I see about the system as the planet. Yeah. The system is the planet, but also when I'm working with a leader, what is the system under? It's the system that this group of people can influence. So I have worked on international issues, but you have to have a leader that can bring those who have an international scope or span together. Or if you're working in a community, if you're working in a school district, if you're working in a prison system, it's what is the system over which this person or people have influence. Now, I'll say one thing about the whole planet, because if you looked at my chapter, it's everything. These are all global issues that we're pouring down on us, and they're all interconnected. And the one thing about translating future search from a room onto virtual, and as I said, it took a year in development with a team I brought together to be able to translate Future Search that you would experience the power of onto a platform and check it out on my website is I have a little faith, some faith that using that vehicle or format will enable us to get people from around the planet together in this virtual world. So Future Search in virtual space is my hope for bringing the power of Future Search to the internet, or whatever you want to call it, virtually. I obviously was not doing the technology part, but we have a pretty robust platform that I've contracted with. So you can ask me more at another time about that. But yeah, what's the system? How do we influence it? Marv and I always said changing the world one meeting at a time. I mean, it's not a new phrase, but if each of us can do, based on the theory of change we hold and the integrity that we have and our ethics and our values, if we can work in a way that's congruent with all of those, with the particular group that we're working with, that's a healthy way to have a meeting. And if we can have more and more healthy meetings, that's one way to change the world.
That's a lovely statement to end on, Sandra. Thank you so much. That's inspiring, and I'm with you. I think I'm very much with you. We wanted to change the topic now and invite our speaker that's going to be talking with us at the next seminar that we're doing in a month, and we're really pleased to have Victoria Marsick, who we're going to be interviewing her around transformational learning. She's a professor at Columbia University who I've known for years and years and years, and have such admirer of her work. So Victoria, tell us a little bit about what you're going to be saying in 1 month's time.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm sorry, Sandra, that I couldn't get here earlier to hear all of your talk. I've been a great follower of all your work for a long, long time, and I'm loving that you're taking it where you are. So it's a gift to even have this little bit of time with you. So thanks. I'm excited, and I'm loving to see Renee Rogers, who I had really early conversations on with, and I'm not surprised she's here either. But anyway. So Nancy and I have been on a journey together over a long period of time, and my part of what we're going to be talking about is that I joined Teachers College, and I had been in conversation with Jack Mesereau. Some of you may know of his work. He did a lot of work. He really was he was convinced that we don't really think about adult learners all the time. We think about educating people as opposed to helping them learn. And he really searched for what were the transformative dimensions of adult learning. And how could you understand how adults, we mostly become socialized into certain ways of thinking and being, and so we often grow up in a mindset that was formed for us without really thinking about that and thinking about our thinking. And so he researched this really initially in the context of programs in colleges where women who had been out of the workforce and out of education, raised families, and were looking to go back into various professions, et cetera, went through these reentry programs. And he could see, he studied really the transformation that went on in these women. So he identified a process that was influenced by a number of things. I do know that he's read some of Boehm's work, but I don't know how much he took it into the work that he was doing. He got very greatly influenced by Jürgen Habermas and by what Habermas worked with around how do you get intersubjective consensus in large groups and in society. And so Habermas really worked at the public and societal level, but Jack kind of looked at that and asked the question of what can this tell us for people who are trying to engage in change themselves, which calls for us getting past our cognitive blind spots and really looking deeply at what we're taking for granted that is tripping us up. So Nancy, I know you'll be thinking of Chris Argyris and Don Schoen in Action Science, because he was influenced by that too. And you know, it's parallel in some ways, but Chris mostly worked within the context of organizational systems, and Jack was really looking at the people who are wherever they are, you know, and how is it that they move forward in this way. So there are many limitations about this too, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. But a group of people have continued to work with these ideas, and the field of transformative learning has expanded quite a bit, and there are different approaches and avenues to it. And I can share some of those thinking, because initially Jack got very caught up in a very rational way of thinking about things and didn't really see the emotional and you know, also a lot of the social support that really went into that. So I hope that's enough of an introduction. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm looking forward to having a conversation with all of you and with Nancy and with Linda about transformative learning.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Victor. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And I don't think the site is up yet that you can actually enroll, but I'm going to put it up as soon as this is over. I will put up the site so you can go ahead and enroll and register for that conversation. I'm just trying to look quickly. Do you remember what date we said, Victoria?
I think it's I've got it on my calendar.
I've got it. Yeah, it's July 30th, and it'll be at our regular time rather than this week. We moved everything down this time, but it'll be back at the 12 o'clock EDT time on the 30th of July. So we're very much looking forward to that. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Linda so that she can help us do the checkout.
So we've reserved about 12 minutes or so just for any other comments that you might have for Sandra, any other questions that are burning. So just raise your hand and I'll call on you, I or Nancy.
Yeah,
I can't.
And we're also, if there's just something, it doesn't have to be questions. If you just want to say something in appreciation for what she's doing or that kind of thing, that's also very welcome at this checkout time.
Anything you've learned. Hugh, I saw your hand come up first. Go ahead.
Thank you for all of that, Sandra. I imagine you were trying to pack so much into what you were saying. And I felt for you sometimes. I wanted to hear more about the despair, but I didn't dare ask for that. I was most interested in whether you could just speak very briefly about your understanding of Bohm's hollow movement. It seems to me that when the system we're dealing with, which I'm engaged with, is the economic system, the entire economic system in which we function as a human race. It is a single system now, and if you're engaging with this system, the economic system, that you can't get that in the room. So I wonder what Bohm's whole work on holism and hollow movement has to teach us on that. If you could offer just a glimpse of that. I know you are understanding a bit of the physics of that, but if you could comment, I would love it.
I wish when we all say goodbye, I'm going to look up Bohm's hollow movement.
Or holoflux, it's called either one. Holoflux or hollow movement. It's the idea Bohm had that life is constantly changing, right? Well, we're a particle and it's consciousness that collapses the wave into particles, right? The implicate, it's all part of that.
Okay, I didn't have the word, but for sure. Let me say that really was the knowing that birthed everybody improving health systems. That life is constantly changing. As a matter of fact, Eric Tristan Fred Emery wrote about the turbulent environment back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, when the word wasn't even used. And now we overuse so many good words. But things are changing so fast. If you think about organizational change, maybe even individual change, in those decades, 50s, 60s or something, people would organize put things in place, and then 7 years later kind of reorganize again. If it was centralized, they decentralize. If it was decentralized, they centralize. And the pace of change was such that there were these periods of time, periods of stability. Well, you know that the periods of stability got shorter and shorter and shorter. And when we were working in the 90s, and I mean, my God, look at it now, things are changing constantly, rapidly. I mean, I haven't looked at the news in 2 hours. Who knows what's going on out there? So how do leaders, how do systems, how do we, in our role as consultants or facilitators, enable a group to do the work that it comes together to do in the face of all of this chaos? And there's a lot of talk about that, but I still believe that it takes the diversity of the system to understand itself more and more. And if that can, in order to act in a more informed, conscious, intentional, and hopefully productive way. And if that can happen in 3 days in this kind of a meeting, I think that's a heck of a good thing. Now, in terms of the economics, I don't know if this will answer your question, Hugh, but I did, and I've done a number of future searches on the issue of economic development. And one in particular was in the city of Derry, Londonderry in Northern Ireland, 6 months after the peace agreement was signed, which was only a piece of paper, as you know, the arms weren't even put down. So I've worked a lot in Northern Ireland where the tension of the Troubles, which was civil war for 30 years, right, was alive and well. And we did create, and by the way, you can find these stories on my website or in the book, Future Search, but check out the website, futuresearch.net. And what am I saying? So there was no choice at that moment but to look at the issue of how do we create an economic development, both strategy and take forward this city that was, what word do I want to say? Was the heart of people using guns against each other, killing each other. And we had, speaking Raja, we had everyone from from all political parties, Protestant, Catholic, rich, poor, etc. And the task, they came together around a task. And I'll just say one more thing. The way we think about systems, which is holistically as opposed to fragmented, in a fragmented way. The economists deal with the economy, the human relations people or sociologists deal with the people, the technologists deal with technology. That's not how I guess that's not how we work. So our work is to bring the people to understand the technology, to improve the economics of their organization or their community. It's all one circle. So that's what I'm always thinking about when I'm thinking about the economics of a region, who has to learn and impact it, and what technology do they have to use. And I'm not just talking about internet technology, whatever the ways are that they connect and work together. Hugh, does this go anywhere near an answer to your questions?
Well, of course it does, and it's such a big question. I appreciate. I had in mind the extent to which we're all treated now as consumers. The entire human race is being converted to consumption, and it's the impact of the economic system on consumption that is destroying the planet as a whole.
Yeah,
but how does one engage with that?
Well, how do we create a focused issue where we have those who are doing the impacting and those who are impacted in the conversation. That's my wish. That's my wish. That's my hope.
Thinking that through.
And it can happen, Hugh.
Yeah.
It can happen. It can happen. I'm not afraid of it happening. I'm only afraid of it not happening.
That's a wonderful statement.
Any other questions or comments for Sandra? We just have a few minutes.
Gotten lots of nice people saying things, thanking you, Sandra, in the chat, which is great.
If not, I actually have a burning question myself, and we were talking about this in the break, but I think it would be worth sharing with the group. I know when we did the session at the ODN conference, Nancy I and Harold Clark, what really popped out for me was the complementariness between what you do and what we're doing in the Academy. Do you want to comment a little bit about that?
Oh my God. Linda and I are in this conversation, and we have to figure out how to marry our two, whatever, our two passions. And that includes all of you, by the way. Mm-hmm. So how do we create this strategic direction that will be implemented that's healthy and productive? And my answer is Future Search principles. And then what? How do we sustain it? Well, there are a number of ways, like bring people back together again, because after Future Search, they're going to be off and doing work. They're going to be in task groups. And again, at Virginia Corrections, Sharon's still nodding her head. You know the task force, the task groups that you're working in. And then what? How do we bring the understanding? There are how many levels of the system? There are many levels of the system. The ones that are important are the human, us as individuals, us as part of an organization or community, and the world. How do we impact every level of the system? My work is focusing on impacting the level of the system that is organizational or community or issue-based, right? But within that are individuals. So yes, doing a Future Search does change the individual because they've had an experience of their reality being confirmed, of learning that they could cross boundaries and work with others that they didn't think they could, et cetera, et cetera. But how do we sustain growing the individual capacity in order to grow the organization or community or issue-based capacity? We do dialogue, we do your work. So
you seem like a perfect marriage. So thank you for
impact the system, we impact individuals.
Right.
So thank you all, and we will see you on July 30th when Victoria will be our interviewee, and much appreciate all the questions and comments that are in the chat.
What a privilege. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Nancy, and everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.